Okay.
Hello?
Okay, Masood, we are live.
All right. Hello, everybody.
Okay, Masood, we are live.
Great.
All right.
Well, hello, everybody. Good night. Thank you for joining us. It's our pleasure to, have this panel here with Jeff Towson, Marcos Vinicius, and Joseph Tepperman. I think we have a great panel about China today. Two guests that know a lot, each one of their own sector. And let me just briefly introduce Marcos, and then Joseph can introduce. Joseph is gonna lead this discussion. Marcos, I suggested Marcos to join us today because I studied with him at the University of São Paulo in law, University of San Francisco here in São Paulo. And Marcos had, an interesting career. In addition to being a lawyer, he was also an entrepreneur. He was a teacher at FOP. He was a politician. He worked for the government. He worked for the private sector. And now he's a guest teacher at one of the most prestigious universities in China. Kind of something, Marcos will let us know, but it's something similar to our Itamaraty, in which they formed the diplomats of China. So he could give us a very nice view of all things China, from history to economic to everything that we know. We have a question. So Marco is going to join us, and Joseph, if you could talk a little bit more. Jeffrey, our other outstanding guest in this panel.
Okay, thanks, Masood. Thanks, Jeff, for joining us. For those of you who are watching us live, Jeff is today in Bangkok, and Bangkok is 10 hours ahead of Brazil. So he woke up 4 a.m. in order to join us. Jeff, thank you very much for being with us, for waking up so early. Jeff is a specialist in digital China, professor for 2 universities in China, and nowadays living in Bangkok. In the past, he used to be a private equity guy. He used to work with healthcare, with Al Walid, Prince Al Walid, handling his investments. And he wrote a bestseller book that everyone should read. The name of the book is 1 Hour China Book. I read it. It's amazing. It's on Amazon, $4.99, right, Jeff? So that everybody can read it. Even with the exchange rate flying here in Brazil, it's gonna be affordable for everyone. So Jeff, we want to start with you, talking about what are the lessons that we can have from digital China. So I give you the word for the next 20 minutes, and we're gonna call Marcos Vinicius after you finish. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. I'll start my clock here to make sure I don't go too far. Can you hear me? Is it working all right? It's okay from here.
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. No, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm a frequent visitor in Brazil. I'm there all the time. It's about my favorite place, but obviously nobody's traveling these days. I put together, I think, basically 3 things that are worth being aware of coming out of digital China, digital Asia. And by digital China, digital Asia, software, the tech giants, pretty much everything on your smartphone. And it just happens that China, Asia is increasingly becoming the world leader at a lot of that stuff. And there's a lot of good business models coming out of here that tend to be very appropriate for Latin America. And we see a lot of these business models being copied, usually first in Southeast Asia and then other parts of the world. So I thought I would talk about sort of 3, I think, interesting developments. I would say the most important things going on right now on digital China, digital Asia that I think are relevant for Latin America. And those three things are basically the combination. Number one would be the combination of e-commerce, entertainment, and social media, which are becoming effectively one thing in many cases. That appears to be the winning formula by companies like Alibaba and others. Number two, live streaming is the go-to solution for almost everybody right now, businesses, individuals, government. It's kind of the function of the year. And then number three, two ideas that I think are compelling out of China that are relevant are basically financial services and financial, and then smart farming. Those are actually big subjects in China that people don't talk about very much, and I thought they were pretty relevant to Latin America. So those are kind of the 3 points I wanted to talk about, and I'll go through them pretty quickly.
Jeff, just a quick interruption. Maybe if you can get the mic, because people are saying it's, you have to speak a little bit louder, or get the mic in your hand too. So that's going to be louder. Much better. Thank you.
Let me know if that's not loud enough. Better?
Much better. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Unfortunately, my computer crashed in the last day, and it turns out it's impossible to get a new computer in Bangkok this week because everything is closed. So I've been ordering stuff. Bad timing. Okay, so point number one. People have kind of recognized that e-commerce, Alibaba, Jingdong, these companies, are quite a bit better in China, Asia than they are in the United States now. Alibaba is better than Amazon. It's years ahead of them. And what has happened, I think, is what we're going to see elsewhere, is e-commerce has more or less merged with entertainment, and it's merged with social media, and it's becoming one integrated function on a smartphone. So I'll give you a little example of that, but I mean, just the basic numbers, I think people tend to forget this or not be aware of it. You go back 10 years ago, China was less than 1% of the world's online transactions. Today, China is the world's largest e-commerce market, not by a little bit, but by a lot. If you take the other leading markets, the United States, France, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, and add them all together, China is still larger than that. It is dramatically larger than anywhere else. We're coming up on about $1.8 trillion per year in spending, which will be about 25% of China's total retail sales volume, which is about 5.6 trillion, which is greater than the United States. Now, why is this so important? It's important because unlike most other countries, China really went digital first, in that basically all the consumers live on their smartphones. That's where retail happens in China. Everything begins and ends on the smartphone, which effectively means that everyone is connected. So it's a connected market. It's a sort of a digital first connected consumer market. So things can ripple very, very quickly. Everyone, if you're successful with any sort of program or application, it will hit everybody very, very quickly. And that's really just, China's just the first market to really become connected first at such a large scale, because you have so many people. So that's kind of the engine of all of digital China, is the fact that consumers are connected. That's kind of the engine of everything. They tend to drive behavior, and businesses more or less just have to respond to them. Most of the big advances we see in digital China are because consumers expect it and businesses have to do it. For example, mobile payment. If you're going to sell anything in China, you have to do it mobile payment, because that's what consumers demand. If you're not offering mobile payment, nobody uses you anymore. You have to have next day delivery. You really have to have same day delivery at this point. If you're selling coffee or food in China online, you pretty much have to deliver within about 20 to 30 minutes. It's just the expectation now. You can't operate without it. The regulations tend to be very, very good. The infrastructure tends to be very good, and it's because you more or less have 1 billion consumers that are all digitally connected, and this is what they expect. So anything that taps into this network, word of mouth, referrals, the ability to share things, takes off very, very quickly. So WeChat, Alipay, things like that. And one of the benefits of this system is because it's all digital, there's a huge amount of data collected. People who buy things on their phones generate a lot of data, and that tends to make things accelerate faster and faster. Okay, why did this happen? Well, because you have 1 billion plus consumers on smartphones, everyone's got a cheap data plan, and everyone's on mobile payments. Once you got those three things in place, China really started to change quickly, and that happened over the last 5 to 6 years. That all fell into place. And as I mentioned, a lot of that drives business behavior. If you're going to market or sell anything in China, you begin and end with social media and digital marketing. It's not one type of marketing, it is the marketing. It's where you have to go. If you can't do digital marketing, if you can't do social media, you pretty much can't sell anything. Cheap, fast delivery is the norm. Mobile payment is the norm. Infrastructure is getting very, very specific and very well tuned to digital behavior. And that's kind of where we are. Now, this is not unlike other parts of the world. It just happened faster in China. And once the network got to scale, companies like Alibaba started to diverge from companies like, let's say, Amazon, or let's say Mercado Libre, or those types of companies in Brazil. Things started to accelerate away. This began about 3 years ago. It's really quite a long ways away now. Alibaba, their first move was to combine e-commerce with entertainment, that these would be the same thing, that you would watch things on TV, anything you buy, anything you could see, you could click on and you could buy. See now, buy now. They would have big galas, they would have big sales events. These are a big deal in China, Asia. Anything you see on screen, you could buy. They would have games, buy now. Lots of basically entertainment videos began to combine with e-commerce very early on. And then this eventually added in social media, which is really WeChat and Weibo. And those three things pretty much all go together at this point. I think that's what we're going to see in the rest of the world. And there's basically Alibaba is the company to follow. That's the company to watch. They are at least 2 to 3 years ahead of Amazon now, and they're basically accelerating away. So that's point number one. Point number two, which is this idea of live streaming. Within this e-commerce plus entertainment plus social media, sort of the white hot center of that for the last year and a half has been live streaming. It is incredibly popular, and this is more or less the latest version of what we call the China influencer economy. Influencers have been around for a while. They began really a decade ago. This is individuals who create content for the most part, and they talk about brands, they talk about goods. Much more powerful in Asia than it is in the West for a couple reasons. The first is they basically offer a lot more than information. They offer opinions and influence. They put out everything about how to use makeup, what's the latest makeup, what are the good handbags to buy in Paris if you're traveling in Paris. They offer opinions, they offer buying decisions, which brands like. And increasingly, they began offering their own products. So the big influencers will have their own stores who will ship their own products. The most popular influencers like Via can move $30–40 million worth of goods in a couple hours when they host specials. I mean, that's fairly powerful. They can have lots of followers, but they can also have very few followers. People think it's about having millions. It's not really about having millions. It can be, More often than not, it's about having a very deep relationship with a very small number of people. And the most popular influencers are sort of deep experts that are trusted, and they produce, they have a loyal following. That's been known for a while. The influencer economy of China is about $15 billion per year right now. For reference, the U.S. movie business, the Hollywood going into theater business, that's about $10 billion per year. Chinese influencers, they're about 15 to 20 right now. They're surpassing television, ads, print media, and they're the sort of the go-to people for brands now, more than celebrities. I mean, you far prefer to have a good influencer than a famous celebrity pitching your subject. The influencer will move more. And they've been around for a while. They did blogs, they did posts, they did photos, unlike Instagram and like that. And short video was particularly popular. That was a year and a half ago. That's TikTok, that's Douyin. But what really let them take off is live streaming. That's when the whole idea of Chinese e-commerce, Chinese influencers really accelerated away, is when live streaming came out. And Taobao Live is the most popular platform. They're very worth following. And so the question is, why did it become so powerful? Why did it become so popular when influencers started live streaming? Well, there was a couple reasons. The first is that anyone could do it. Literally anyone could take their smartphone, turn it around, and start live streaming because the apps work so well. And because in China, the apps link in very easily to e-commerce, into mobile payment, into logistics, it all ties together. Unlike trying to be an influencer by advertising, you could monetize immediately. You didn't have to wait until you became popular. You didn't have to generate tons of content, get followers, and then sell advertising. As soon as you started live streaming, you could start to make money either by selling stuff or gifting. And it lets you basically make money and become famous, which people like both of those things. So live streamer took off very, very quickly. Taobao jumped on this and started. Taobao is Alibaba. It's their big platform. They have two, Taobao and Tmall. Live streaming on Taobao Live. 400 plus million people watch this stuff. 70% of them are women. The popular categories are clothing, cosmetics, childcare, maternity. Typically, live streaming happens between 8 and 10 p.m. at night. That people work during the day, they go home, they sit on their beds, and then they watch some live streaming, their favorite influencers, and then they buy stuff. 43% of the users are 24 to 30 years old. Most users access live streaming 4 times a day, and they watch for about 25 minutes. So that's kind of point number 2. I'm almost out of time here. I've got 5 minutes left. So basically the takeaway from that is take a look at Taobao Live, take a look at JD Live, that's Jingdong. And you can kind of look at live streaming. It's also worth looking at short video, TikTok, and then influencers in general. But brands love them. They hire these KOLs, these influencers, to help them build brand awareness, to increase their sales, and to get data of potential customers. That's really one of the big things they want. All right, last point. 4 minutes left. Last point for this is, I think two phenomenon people aren't really paying enough attention to, especially out of Brazil, Latin America, in terms of digital China. Number one would be smart farming. That, as most people know, maybe some people know, China has a massive agriculture problem. It is a very dry country. They have very little water. They have very little usable land in terms of agriculture. Really lacks both. And then you have a legacy of a lot of state-owned or now privately owned farms that are very, very small, very sort of underdeveloped. You have a very primitive farming history here that was built up. And because of those two things, the farming sector is very undeveloped, has a lot of problems, has a lot of quality problems, a lot of performance problems. And the digital giants have really started to focus on this. So companies like Jingdong, Alibaba, Tencent, all the major tech giants all have some farming programs and farming tech that they're developing. So they call it ag tech or farm tech. It's worth taking a look at JD Farms. They have some new initiatives they've been rolling out over the last 6 months. And basically what they're doing, to give you the short version, is they're giving digital tools to small farmers, where they give them IoT sensors, they give them lots of tools that gather data about how much fertilizer to use per meter of land, how much water to use. They're basically trying to help them gather data by giving them tools and then allow them to standardize performance and become more data-driven, as opposed to, well, we're a small farm, let's just dump fertilizer on everything, because if we don't, we won't sell, and then maybe we don't make any money. So help them to become more data-driven and scientific, and they're providing all these new tools to them, and then they're providing them logistics, because JD has a big logistics infrastructure, and market access. So they can go to these small farms and give them data tools for free, lots of standardization, then give them very easy to use logistics and let them put up their own stores on e-commerce and sell directly to consumers, as opposed to going through distribution. So they're doing a lot of this right now. It's a big deal. I think that's worth looking to, because they can sell internationally into places like Brazil as easily as they do in China. One more minute. The other company I would keep an eye on is Ant Financial, which is part of Alibaba, started with Alipay, and now has become a full financial services AI company. They're not public yet, so the data is not as well as known, but they are incredibly important. They went from, they basically did what a lot of countries want to do, which is they did mobile payment first, and then they went right into credit for consumers, credit for suppliers, people who sell on e-commerce. Then they went into insurance, then they went into social credit scoring, then they went into wealth management products, then they went into money markets. They're now the largest money market in the world. And they've become a massive financial services company that does things basically without people. I'll leave you with one last factoid. The number that they put out, which is the important number, they call it 301, which is, it's on their information, their brochures. It basically means 3-minute application, a 1-second approval, and 0 humans involved. So 3, 1, and 0. And basically, software runs the entire platform, all the core operations. So that's why they can approve new loans within 1 second, because there's no people. And once you remove people, once the AI does everything, you can basically remove all limits to scale. You can serve 10 million customers as easily as you can serve 5. So they can scale up infinitely, and they can handle complexity because there's no people. So they have basically built a massive, what we call AI factory, and they're doing it in financial services, and they're rolling it out internationally. They started in China, now they're all over Southeast Asia, everywhere from Myanmar to Pakistan to the Philippines, and they will keep going international. So that's kind of a company to watch. Okay, so that's kind of, I think I'm right on time. Right on time. Those are kind of the takeaways, which are look at this combination of e-commerce plus social media plus entertainment. That's number 1. Number 2, everything is leading to live streaming right now. And number 3, keep an eye on Ant Financial and smart farming as kind of the new frontiers of China that are pretty big deal. And that's it.
Okay, Marcos.
Joseph, I cannot hear you.
Okay.
All right. Can I?
Please,
Okay.
you can share your screen and I'll put your slides here. Thank you.
Okay. Hold on 1 second. Yeah. There you go. Can you see it? Now can you see?
Okay, Marcos, you can go ahead. It's perfect.
Now, Joseph, can you hear me? Just to confirm that I.
Yes, I can hear you. There's a 15 delay from what we speak so that you can see in YouTube, so you can speak freely.
Okay, so I can start there, right? Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today. And I appreciate organizing this. I must apologize for the fact that Luis said that I was a politician, considering the situation in Brazil and how bad politicians, the bad reputation they have. I have to say, no, I'm not a politician. I just like politics a little bit too much. Now, the topic is the ascension of China, and it's a very interesting topic. And as I said to you, I'm a visiting professor at China Foreign Affairs University. I have prepared this presentation for you, and of course, there are more things than you need. But I wanted you to uh, keep this material just for you to have a look into it. Now, first of all, this I think is the first thing that you need to start getting used to, right? See the world map with China at the center. The word Zhongguo, which in China means the country, the land of the center, right? The middle country. So we should start getting used to the idea that this is the world map that we're going to start to see more often than we are used to, in the sense that we always look into the Western world, with Europe and Africa at the center. Now, the current global situation, I'd say there are four things that we need to think about that are happening. One is that we go through one of the most interesting transitions in the history of the world, which is the process of having one power ascending and one declining. And this is always a complicated time and always a complicated issue for us to consider, right? What history has shown is usually the declining power will try to create lots of traps for the incoming power not to ascend. Now, with this ascension of China, what we see is that people are fearful about the future because there's a general sense of insecurity and fear. But one thing that I wanted to stress to you today is that, China is not like the Soviet Union, and China is not like Japan. So if you're coming with a Cold War mentality, this is not going to work with China, and I'll tell you the reason why later. And one of the interesting things about COVID-19 is that even though people have been saying that, it's awful, people are going to stop buying Chinese products and all that. If I were to line up what is the first year of the Asian century, say that the tragedy of COVID-19 is actually the beginning of this Asian century, and how much we have realized that we are extremely dependent on China. And it's not only Brazil, it's all over, it's the whole world. Now, what is the new normal, right, in this current global situation? Well, the new normal is this conflicted relationship between the two world powers, right? And why do we have that? Well, because we have enormous disparities. The economic models are different, the political models are different, and the perspectives that each one has of the world and its future is different. Now, what we see is that China is seeking to attain prominence and relevance in this new world order, while the United States is seeking to keep things as they are, to maintain the status quo. And what history has shown is that those who are seeking to attain something they tend to be more engaged and willing to sacrifice and take risks, much more than those who are willing to preserve things as they are. So that's the status that we see. And what we're observing is that because of this fear and this complexity with the future, people are very fearful about what is going to happen and what are the new paradigms that we're going to see as we move on. Now, a few things for you to remember. One, there will be changes in the United Nations system, and mostly because the Achilles heel of the United Nations system is that it reflects the world in 1944. So here we are, 75 years later, and we're still applying, the same methodology, keeping the same players, and that's what people are complaining about, and that's what the immersion of China is going to change, right? The Chinese, uh, basically, they always will say to you that they want liberal institutions of the West, but that as they come along, they're going to try to make changes to adapt these institutions, and for those countries in the West that have created them, right? So we see that happening all the time, and that's something for you to consider as you look into the future. Second thing is the Chinese are working intensively on actually in the future replacing the RMB and having the RMB replace the United States dollar. Money is based on confidence, and it's based on confidence in the political system, and not only in the political system, but also in the policies that have been applied by the countries. In 2007, the United States had devalued the currency, and whenever you see these movements that people want to freeze the Chinese money in the United States, or not have, the Americans pay their debt dollar, and particularly in Asia, where people, since the crisis, the Asian financial crisis, have not been extremely confident in the capability of the United States to work or remain a reliable partner. So that is something that you see the Chinese moving on steadily, and one of the reasons and one of the issues that they have done to do that is, actually making the RMB part of the the monetary, the IMF basket of currencies, and slowly you also see the Chinese becoming like the largest trading partner of the majority of the countries in the world. Now, another issue that you need to consider is military capability. We talk a lot about having a great military is good, but having an enormous military bill may be good, but may not be effective, because what you realize is that it's very costly and nobody uses them as much, right? We civilian purpose of military weaponry is to not to be used. Really, it's just a deterrence factor. And these military expenses have somehow affected some investments that the United States needs to do, particularly in its infrastructure. We know that the military rates trickle-down effects on the impact that they have on technological growth. But the truth is that the infrastructure in the U.S. has deteriorated a lot, and they seem not to have the budget sometimes to do it. Now, another issue that we have seen is the industrialization, with China becoming the global factory and due to the smart use of its workforce, right? The Chinese have one basic commodity, and that's what they considered about in 1979. They have a lot of people. Let's put these people to educate, to work. And there are three other things that they did that are important for us to consider. First of all, the Chinese have a high savings rate, right? Since in China you pay everything up front, you always need to have the money saved. And when you pay anything up front, you always think about whether it's relevant or not. Second, there is a growing investment in education, right? The Chinese have invested a lot in education, and if you check into the university rankings, last year, Tsinghua University was classified among the 20 top universities in the world, which is a major achievement for a country like China, right? When you look into this, and you see, user force, savings rate, and the growing investment in education has made Chinese very competitive, and that's why we see, this shifting and this movement, industries moving from the West into Asia and really China. Also, the Chinese have imported all the environmental problems that we had in the West. The Chinese basically absorbed them. They do have pollution in their cities and all that, but what you realize is that was an important factor for them to grow. And now there's a lot of discussions on how to make China more environmentally friendly. Now, many things for us to consider about this world order. The most important thing is to consider is that economic power will prevail over military power. And one thing that you should also remember is that China doesn't want to be the police of the world like the United States does, the role that the US plays. Why? Because China has a very complicated neighborhood. Like, if you look into China, they're surrounded by 4 nuclearized countries: India, North Korea, Pakistan, and Russia. South Korea and Japan, they basically represent the presence of the United States in Asia. With Vietnam, they have been in a war for 1,000 years, right? And what you realize is that, the Chinese, whatever movement they make, it creates a lot of, concerns in Asia. So that's something for you to remember. Now, don't think that China is going to act like the United States, because the US has an advantage. The US has the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, Canada, and Mexico. So, they don't have any military threats to think about. Now, another thing is that technology is the leading force for growth and development in all alliances. 5G is the first, push of the Chinese to set up the world standard when it comes to technology. And we're going to see this evolving into artificial intelligence and all that. Now, remember, we used to talk a lot about, the best cars being German, but if you consider the future and you think that, electric cars are now being produced in China, eventually the Chinese will have the best cars that are electric cars. So, that's a major paradigm. We're moving from, German industry in autos, and we're going to start seeing the best electric autos coming from China. That's a shifting paradigm, and the technology is driving this. And it's important for China because, somehow moves China to a second, another level when it comes to its GDP per capita. Now, the Chinese are very pragmatic. They are not going to go around saying that they have best, democracies are the best thing in the world. They are not, they are not going to talk about human rights, and they're not going to talk about challenges that they have sometimes domestically, and they're not going to be addressing that. And the Chinese really don't like the idea of intervention in other countries. Now, we also see that there is a huge discussion on the political systems that we have nowadays, right? If you look into the situation in China, how quickly they were able to address the COVID-19 crisis, it really makes people in China evaluate and compare. And when they compare what is happening in the West and what happened in China, they really think about the whole discussion that we always have about the Chinese political system, but which one is delivering the most important thing to its people, which is the prosperity, right? So that's something for you to remember when you're talking about, the Chinese political system. You have to look into the situation as a Chinese, right? And if you compare to which system is delivering the best results for the population, perhaps you are going to understand why there is so much support, in a way, of the CPC. Now, we do see a lot of, stagnation in this content in the West about our political system, like, even the discussion about democracy, right? The government of the people, for the people, and to the people, and by the people. We always ask, so who are these people that they are talking about, leading the governments? Who are the people in democracies, right? Those are things that we need to consider. Now, as a rising power, we need to look into the following things. There you go, China. You see, GDP in dollars, China is still number 2, but in per capita, in purchasing power, China is number 1, right, already. So it's important for you to remember that, that, and the goal is to have China with, $25,000 or as GDP per capita by 2049. So, we're slow. Chinese are slowly moving into that. This chart shows you the GDP per based on purchasing power parity, and it shows you the size and the chunk of China in world GDP. Now, the future of China, people have to, people are going to, particularly the Americans, is it a regional rival? Is China only to compete in Asia? Is it like an equal competitor? Are we going to see, it's an ideological rival, right? And, forget the word communism there, right? The Chinese, they don't even call it communist anymore. They call it socialist with Chinese characteristics, right? And how do you make China, a responsible stakeholder in the whole thing? That's a major discussion that we always talk about when we're addressing the future of China. Now, what we do see is that there is this important transition for China into the world stage, right? And it's the one thing for you to remember. The Chinese no longer want to be known as the global factory. They want to be known as the largest global marketplace. Think about every Chinese in the future with a GDP per capita of $20,000. That's a lot of consumption that you're going to see emerging out of China. Now, there you go. I like to show this because in 1990, Brazil was ahead of China, right? And 20 years later, China was number 2. And Brazil had moved from 9 to 6, right? And now we're back to 8. So that's important for you to see the kind of level of commitment that the Chinese have had to make a country that was really, really backwards move all the way to the second largest economy in the world. And what Jeff said, one of the leading countries when it comes to the digital age. Now you see the share of GDP, Latin America very stable, Asia, and that's basically China, always moving up, while European Union was losing their presence, and also the United States, maintaining, but not moving on, progressing like they did in the past. Now, a few things for you to remember, China has a very competitive market. And if I'm going to say what are the exceptional things about China, of course, it's the market size and the workforce. Bigger than anything that you can think about in the world, but a highly competitive economy based on the fact that they have a lot of people, right? And Confucianism, in a way, creates this sense that they are, they need to have merit when they go up, right? In society and in power and in government and all that. So we see, China is slowly integrating into the world through more exports. Why is that? Well, because they had to adopt very flexible labor practices. Now, we talk a lot about, the Chinese having slave factories and all that. I have to warn you that the GDP, the average worker in Beijing makes a whole lot more money than they do in Sao Paulo right now, right? And the flexibility of the work hours and all that and the work practices was what really prompted China to move quicker from being a very, very poor country into a middle-income country in a short period of 40 years. Now, they kept the exchange rate, and one of the things that we see, the challenges that they have is overcoming this middle-income trap, right? They have to manage the aging of the population. The population is getting old, and there's always the fear, like Brazil, that the population may become old before they become wealthy. And they, of course, they need to address the challenges imposed by COVID-19, which will be reduced exports, unemployment, inflation. All these things are concerns that the Chinese have when they're looking into the future of their economy. Now, there is also speculative investment in real estate. You've all heard about it. You've read that in the news. And one of the complicated things is how they're going to deal with the relationship with the United States, right? As an opposing power, and usually all the, advertisement and all the propaganda that you have against China that has been built in the West. This is the deficit of the U.S. with China. It's important for you to know that the United States doesn't have much to export to China, right? China is a fully industrialized country, and the United States, when it comes to the trade deal with China, the most important things for them were agriculture, airplanes, cars, and chips, right? Those are the four major things that the United States exports to China, and that's why you have this increasing deficit in the relationship. Now, Chinese investments, because of the trade wars, have fallen into in the amount of investments that they were making in the United States, and they have shifted many of these investments from Silicon Valley to Beijing and other areas where they are developing more technology in China. So, and finally, they have the Belt and Road Initiative, which is the Chinese idea to address the excess capacity that they have, export Chinese standards to the world, and develop a better integration with their surrounding economies. Now, China is seeking the world to accept the Chinese standards, and one of the important things for them is always through infrastructure, right? Where you see the Chinese moving with particular concern with infrastructure, because that's really their big point, throughout history. Now, they need to deal with the excess capacity that they have. It's a complicated issue for them because it's costly, and they think that this excess capacity can actually squeeze their corporate profits, increase debt levels, and make the country's financial system more vulnerable. So what you're going to see is that China is going to upgrade. They want to use the standards that they have built and spread it through the countries that are members of the Belt and Road Initiative. So, and where do they go? Transportation, infrastructure, trade and investment, energy and natural resources, and financial security. So you see here, not much with Taylor, but those are the basic areas where President Xi Jinping wants to address when he talks about the economic dimension of BRI. So we have challenges ahead. Chinese companies do lack experience investing overseas, and that affects their sustainability, right, in the long term. They're concerned about the United States and Russia. Russia is an interesting neighbor throughout history. And, and the fear that they have is that they're not used to coordinating with more, so many cultures and so many countries with different cultures, social systems, and different challenges. So BRI is an important aspect of the Chinese future. It's an essential tool for China to play a major role in the world, and so on. I think I have concluded my time, but I wanted to conclude with three ideas for you to take into consideration. One, the world is changing. It's fast, it's deep, and it's not going to alter in the future, and we should take that into consideration. Two, China is the new kid on the block, and do not think that China is going to be affected by COVID-19 as people are thinking that they're going to do it, right? And third, we need to rethink our economies and the role that the countries are going to have when they deal with China. So I think this is the most important thing for us to consider, right? How do we engage with China in a way that's profitable and in a way that we are not trying to, light a candle to two different saints, as we say in Portuguese, because, China came and they're here to stay in that sense. So those are my comments. If you need anything, this is my information. And Joseph, back to you.
All right, I'm back. Thank you so much, Professor Marcos, for your explanation about China. And I see that you spoke in a macro level. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about Brazil and China relationship nowadays.
I think the greatest challenge that we have is that there are some people in government that have not realized that China is Brazil's largest trading partner and one of Brazil's major investors, and the relationship between the two can only grow because we do not compete with each other. Now, let me give you an example. The trade deal between China and the United States, 40% of it is agricultural related stuff, right? Which is direct competition with Brazil. So what I think is that we have some people that have been spreading around these conspiracy theories about China, trying to downgrade the relationship between us. And I think it's not a smart move. I think, Brazil needs to understand China. We're not competitors. We can use, the Brazilian president, right? The BRICS that people complain a lot, BRICS allows the Brazilian government to have a seat on the table with China every single year. And we can talk, right? Brazil doesn't have that kind of access, for instance, with the United States or the European Union. So I think, we need to get, some people see the word communism in the Communist Party of China, and they think it's an ideological thing. Here we need to be pragmatic and realize, okay, where can we make money and how we can do that in a way that both countries are going to benefit.
Okay. Let me try to call Jeff. He was having issues with connectivity because his computer broke yesterday. Jeff, can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, amazing. Jeff, you come to Brazil almost every year, or every year, the last years. I brought you twice, and I know that you like to spend your vacation in Rio de Janeiro. And you had the chance to visit some Chinese companies here in São Paulo and other cities. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you saw in the Chinese companies here in Brazil, and what are the companies that are still not here? What is the next move? Because when you came here last time, you said, keep an eye on TikTok. The quick videos is a fever in China, and it's gonna come to Brazil really soon. So tell us a little bit about the digital China in Brazil, and what are the next steps for digital China in Brazil?
Right, like the digital giants of China, companies like Alibaba, Tencent, TikTok, which is ByteDance. For Latin America is kind of a question mark for them. They all want to focus on Asia because they view that as a strategic priority. So Alibaba is big in Thailand. It just is. It's a strategic imperative. And outside of that, there's sort of two question marks for these digital giants. One is India and one is Latin America.
Jeff, someone is telling me maybe if you take your hand out of the mic, it's going to be louder for everyone. I don't know. Let's try different. Let's prototype.
How is that?
Better. I think it's better.
Okay. To repeat that part, the digital giants of China are focused on Asia primarily. It's a strategic imperative for them. Outside of that, there's two question marks. There's India and there's Latin America. And they're basically opportunistic. If Tencent sees a good deal in Brazil, it will move very quickly. So will Alibaba. If the opportunity comes, they will move. They'll emanate pretty fast. And within Latin America, they really are looking at Mexico and Brazil, obviously. So we've seen Tencent buy some stuff in Brazil. We've seen Didi, the Uber of China, although really it's Uber of everywhere but the US, basically. We saw them acquire 99. And I met with them. I met with the folks at Didi and 99 in Sao Paulo. And they're running a playbook that is far more similar to that you see in Asia than you see in the US. They're focused on the unbanked population. They're focused on the Northeast. They're focused on people who don't have bank accounts or credit cards. And that's pretty common in this part of the world. A lot of these companies are very good at situations like that because it's pretty much how a lot of Asia is. So I think they're going to go after, I think you're going to see them as much as possible try and copy what worked in Asia in Brazil, if they can. But they probably won't do it directly by startup. They'll look to partner with people. But I I think this is an area where the digital giants of China, like, if they could go after a foreign market, I think India and Latin America are the two that they're most interested in. They're not that interested in Russia, Eastern Europe, and Europe and the US are too different. So it's probably LATAM and India.
Thank you, Jeff. Marcos, I got a question here from Italo Pacheco from the group, and he's asking, how can Brazil and the Brazilian companies benefit from this trade war between China and US?
Okay, now let me add something that Jeff said, and I think it's interesting. The concern that they have about now Asia, 60% of the world population lives in Asia. And I think that Brazil does have some characteristics still with people who are unbanked. So I think, I agree with him completely, this idea that they're going to look for, possible partnerships with Brazilians. And I think, it's a very good comment that he made regarding, the future in this relationship. Now, the trade war between Brazil and China, not Brazil, between the United States and China, is not something that is going to go away, right? If you think about it, the trade war, the results, of China buying more products from the U.S. would be an important card for the re-election of President Trump. Now, with COVID-19, all the things that were being discussed are somehow a little slow. So the economic impact is not going to be there as it was, expected before. Of course, President Trump says that the partnership and the trade, things are going well. Now, how can Brazil benefit in that sense, right? Because we're going to be affected, as I said to you, 40% of the trade, of the trade agreement is, agricultural stuff. So, what is my counsel, right, to Brazilian companies? First of all, try to partner with Chinese companies and try to get the Chinese companies to add value to products in Brazil, right? The Chinese, they like to, verticalize everything, not because they want to buy, the whole sector. It's just that since they do not rely or they do not know the local customs or they do not trust the local partners, somehow it makes sense for them to integrate the whole thing from top, all the way from the top to bottom, and that's how they do it because it's an unfamiliar territory for them. Brazil is unfamiliar, and Brazil is complicated, and we don't make things as easy or as it is in other Asian countries. So I think that if we can work with the Chinese and add values to our commodities in Brazil and use Brazil as a platform to export into the United States and Europe, because at the end of the day, those are the major consumer markets in the world, and it's not going to change, for the foreseeable future. Asia is coming along, it's coming up, but those are the two areas where they're going to consume more. So, and we use Brazil by adding value in Brazil to these other, even to China, and go back to China. So those are things that I think would be important. Add value, keep the trade flowing in China, and stop saying, stop criticizing, and start, let's have more missions and let's have more interaction in our business community so that we can do more business.
Okay. Question for both of you. How is that for a Brazilian and an American to live in China?
Are you still there?
Can you hear me? Okay, so let's start with you, Marcos.
I'd like to be an American living in China. Now, I'll say too, China was a big surprise for me. I went there for 1 year. I have to tell an interesting story. I went there for 1 year, right? And when I was there, after my second month, somebody from the university approached me and they said, okay, would you like to stay a little longer? I said, well, how long? And said, could you stay here for 3 years? And I said, okay, let me think about it. Because I've been enjoying, it's quite an upbeat atmosphere, right? The Chinese are thinking that they see the growth of China, and it's very easy for you to get some things in China. And and there is in my school, I'm teaching future diplomats, so we're all just about China playing a major role in the future. So it's a very exciting ascension and becoming number one. So I came back to Brazil on vacation in January, and when I go back to China, I checked my bank account, and they had double my salary. I said, well, that's the incentive for me to stay in China for a little longer. And so what I said, it's been a great experience. And I like the country, and I like, the sense of security that you have. Some people are going to complain about some issues, but I said, overall, it has been a very, very red carpet experience. And they like Brazil, believe it or not. Brazil, whenever we talk about Brazil, the first thing that people mention is always soccer, right? That's the
Soft
big thing
power.
about Brazil, in the sense
We have the soft power,
of Brazil's perspective and soft power. But I think that I'm enjoying it a little. I say to my Chinese friends, I'm enjoying it a little too much.
Okay, what about you, Jeff? Can you tell everybody what you told me when you came to Brazil about your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly interested in the business side of things. Obviously, there's pros and cons of lifestyle and things like that, but the business side, if things are just moving so fast. The pace of it is really great fun. Silicon Valley is pretty fast. Digital China is significantly faster. Things are happening quicker. There's more companies. They rise quicker. They emerge every month. There's a new app that people are talking about. So it's just a very dynamic place. It's also very cutthroat. One of the reasons it's so dynamic is it's so ferocious. So it's a tough place to be an entrepreneur. But yeah, so for me, it's great because there's just business after business to look at. They change so quickly. Everything advances so fast that it's really interesting. Not sure I'd want to be an entrepreneur there. That's a little daunting. But apart from that, it's great. And a lot of that we are seeing it's becoming more of an Asia story than it used to be. Than a China story. So most of these companies are active here in Thailand. They're active in Singapore. So it's kind of that digital craziness is extending to the whole area. So it's just an exciting place to be if this is your subject. If you're in the farming business, it's not as exciting because things actually move kind of slow. So it just happens I'm in a sort of particularly fast sector.
Okay, we have here a question from Alexandre Coelho. He's asking Professor Marcos if you believe that China is creating a parallel financial system in relation to USA and European Union. He gave the example of the New Development Bank.
I'm not saying a parallel, but what I say is this. They have realized that within the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank and the IMF, things are not going to change. And that's unfortunate, right? So the Chinese are realizing that in order to become more effective, in order to have their voice more active, some of these institutions are not going to work for them. So what are they doing? Well, they have the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, which is a huge, bank, which major projects in all over the world. They have the New Development Bank with BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They have BRI, right, the Belt and Road Initiative. So you do see the tentacles of the Chinese trying to create a network where they can actually use their currency to build, right? Actually an alternative, right? It's not that the dollar is going to disappear or the US is going to disappear, because you have to remember, the Chinese hold almost 2/3 of American debt, right? So it's in their interest for them to keep, the dollar is still up and not devalued or anything like that. But they understand that, as we build the new world order, financial systems are important. And what I think is that what they're basically trying to do is, build the partnerships, and then in the future, since they are the number one trading partner between two countries, why don't these two countries start paying each other with, RMBs instead of using the dollar? And one thing that Jeff can attest to you, if you think about the end of, pay money, it's a very digital idea when it comes to using, it's a cashless society, it's moving fast into becoming a cashless society and all that. So, in the future, I think the Chinese will be giving us some good ideas on, how to change the whole financial sector. The leadership that the U.S. has always had in finances somehow are going to be affected by it.
Okay. Jeff, this question is for you, from Andre Gregory. He's the CEO for ThinkSeg, and he's asking your opinion if China is going to suffer an embargo from any countries after COVID.
Yeah, isn't that the big question of the month? I don't know. I only know what I read in the paper on that. But obviously, discussion, at least in the U.S., I don't know, I don't follow the Brazilian press, I follow the U.S. press. And obviously the discussion on COVID versus related to China has changed significantly in the last, even 2 weeks. The language is changing. What people are saying is changing. It's getting a lot harsher. How far that's going to go? I don't know. I was on Chinese state TV about 6 months into the trade war, back when it just started out, and aluminum tariffs had been put on, which Brazil got hit harder than other countries, which was strange. And everyone was shocked that Trump had put 5% tariffs on some goods, and everyone's like shocked that this was never been done before. And then 6 months later, that was nothing compared to what had happened. And 6 months later, it was nothing. Like the way this escalates up every 3 months beyond what I thought was reasonably possible, it's been going on for 2 years. So I don't think anything's off the table at this point. I get surprised every 3 months of, well, that was a big move. Okay. So we'll see. The COVID thing is obviously, there's a lot going on. I think a little more easy to look at would be something like the situation with Huawei, the telecommunications giant, who I deal with quite a lot. I visit them on a regular basis. And, they got hit with a tech ban out of the United States. That was a big move. And there's rumors of another one coming. So the tariff situation, I don't know what's going to happen with COVID, but the tariff situation is existing and going forward, and the tech situation is existing and going forward in terms of U.S. and China. So we've got two frontiers happening. If the COVID one happens, I guess that's a third frontier. So we'll see. These are strange times.
Marcus, what is your view on this one? Marcus?
Yes.
What is your view on this one? Embargo from many countries?
The reality is, Joseph, the whole world somehow has been deindustrialized, right? We have shifted production to China. And why? Well, because it was cheaper to produce in China. And we got used to cheaper stuff, right? Now, I remember that people in the past, when they would buy a television set, it was like, a family project. Now you go to the store and you see the pricing of TVs and you realize how cheap they are. And you say, wow, something happened here. And that's, access to cheaper labor, because the Chinese inserted 400 million people into the workforce in a matter of, very short period of time. So what I see is that, what is the interest of countries trying to, and I understand some countries are going to pull back and try to create recreate some of their national industries. And what they're going to find out is that, first of all, their pricing is going to be more expensive. So the population will need to get used to pay more. Second, right, because they're producing locally, they will not have the same kind of competitiveness as the Chinese do. Second, it will have an impact on inflation depending on the kind of product that they have. And third, if these companies decide to leave China and not and abandon the Chinese market, they will give up on a very huge market where they could actually make a lot of money, and that will have an impact on even their stock, right, in the pricing of their stock and the value of their stock. So I think that people are going to be talking a lot about creating sanctions against China, or even I've heard in the U.S. that some people want to file compensation, lawsuits against the Chinese government for COVID. But what I do see is that as we have designed the world nowadays, it's very difficult for us to. So my view is that, okay, we're going to criticize, but we're going to eventually realize that basically, until we find a way where we can become more competitive, nothing is going to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is the greatest example of Chinese competitiveness compared to anyone else? Wasn't bad. ICU hospital in 10 days. Now, Brazil is trying to build some hospitals with 50 or 100 beds for 3 months, right? So you see that, okay, yeah, we can compete, but are the people willing to pay more for that? Are we going to go back into the 70s where we have import substitution policies and all that reapplied? And it would make no sense to me. So I think that what I would need to do, and what I think countries need to do, is that they need to look into themselves again, see where they are productive, see where they're competitive, and really, emphasize that, and not try to produce things that, we have lost the competition.
Okay, Marcus, do you have any question to Jeff?
Now, Jeff, what is your favorite thing about China when it comes to the adoption of new technologies? Are the Chinese more prone to adopting new technologies, or in relation to the Americans, more enthusiastic about new things?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically true. There's a couple of factors playing out, but one of them is there is a lack of ingrained habits. One of the reasons why mobile payment took off in China as opposed to the United States is because Americans already had credit cards, and China didn't. And going from cash to mobile payment was a nice step up. Going from credit cards to mobile payment is not a huge step up. Credit cards actually work pretty well. So you have a lot of lack of ingrained habits for a lot of things. So that helps. And then on top of that, I think this is the one that was sort of surprising, is there's this huge enthusiasm for everything digital. Everything. Like, they're super adopters of everything on a smartphone. And things just take off quick. People try stuff all the time. QR codes on everything. And generally speaking, Chinese consumers spend more time on the internet per week than just any other consumer, US, European, whatever. They're the world's most enthusiastic content creators, writing blogs, leaving reviews, creating videos. They do that more than just about any other population per capita. It turns out they're really enthusiastic about pretty much anything on a smartphone. So, it makes it easy to launch new products because you can get a lot of people to try stuff quickly. There's some smaller populations where we see some enthusiasm, but generally speaking, China is a pretty extreme example relative to other countries. And that's a real bonus. It really does help. People try stuff all the time. Crazy stuff.
Yeah, and Jeff, something that you told me when you came to Brazil, that like the American dream that people knew in the past that if they work hard in America, they would get a better standard of living. It's happening in China, right? You told me stories that people go from countryside to the main cities to work hard, drive a taxi, and study in the university. Can you speak a little bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of this is just entrepreneurial behavior. In any country you look at, these numbers are kind of fake, but they're probably directionally true. You can look at what percentage of the population is involved in entrepreneurial activity, either starting company or investing. And the numbers tend to be like 12%, 15%, and the numbers out of China tend to be higher than that. I don't really believe the numbers, but I believe the fact that it's actually higher in China. That everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Like everybody wants to start a company. Everybody's buying homes and flipping them. You know, it's just a very entrepreneurial place as a population. I haven't seen the numbers I really believe, but I think that's pretty much true relative to, certain parts of the U.S. So it's an entrepreneurial place. Everyone wants to get rich. The funny thing is, when I'm in China, we don't talk about politics at all. Now, it's probably because many other people do. Everyone just talks about business and money all the time. I go back to the U.S., everyone talks politics all the time. I go to Beijing, I've never talked it ever with anybody. We're always talking business and making money.
Marcus, give us your point of view on what Jeff said. Marcus is frozen.
And may I add one thing,
Marcus,
Joseph, I think.
Can you start again because you were frozen?
And it's true.
Poor connection. Let me try to.
Can you
Marcus,
hear me well?
let's try again. Okay, now it's good.
Now, is it better?
Okay. Perfect.
Okay, sorry. Now, what I was saying to you is this, you realize that when you do not talk about politics and government all the time, life is so much better in a way, right? So much better, right? And I remember when I was living in Venezuela, people would say, if Chavez would die, there would be a huge silence in the country because people would have no topic to talk about for at least 1 hour, right? So that's what is happening with us. We talk a lot about politics and all this stuff. But China has two things that are interesting. One, when you have a population that is that size, you need to be competitive because you are 1 in 1.4 billion, right? So that makes you competitive. Now, and then they have the Confucianism idea, which is for you to ascend and go up, you need to have merit. And the funny thing is that my students always tell me, professor, if I have an idea, right? If I have a good idea, and every Chinese were to give me 1 RMB, I am going to be a billionaire. Right? And it's so funny because, if you think about it, if every Chinese were to give you 1 real, you're going to become a billionaire because it's 1.4 billion, right?
Yeah.
It's more than, it's more than a lottery or a mega sena that you'd get in Brazil. So, and that's why I think they have that sense. And that is also one of the challenges that China has, right? Because if you have a successful idea, you can become very wealthy and all that. And that's why inequality is an issue that is always going to be, a problem in China because you can, if you just count on the Chinese market alone, and if you have a successful idea, it's easy for you to become a giant. Now, one thing that I was talking to a friend of mine who's in the $1 million to invest. Do I invest in a company in China or do I invest in a company in Brazil? And he said, there's no way they're going to invest in Brazil because if it is a retailing company, retail company, the multiples that they can get in China are so much higher than they would ever get in Brazil that it would actually make their price and then their value go down, right? It says this, and I think, Jeff can attest to you, what really amazes, one of the interesting things about the US was always the multiples, right? That's one of the fascinating things about the American society was the size of things and the multiples on that and that. When you go to China, you have the American society with more multiples, even more. And if the Chinese, they keep increasing their GDP per capita, then it becomes, the numbers really become tremendous.
Yeah, Chinese GDP per capita is higher than Brazilian GDP per capita nowadays, right? And I got a question, Marcus. Are you able to criticize?
In 1970,
are you able to criticize?
1979, the GDP of China.
Are you able to criticize the system? Yeah. Are you able to criticize the system? Can you, if you want to?
Now, let me tell you one thing that's interesting. In 1979, the Chinese GDP per capita was 10 times less than Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Now, think about 40 years have gone by, and their GDP per capita is higher than ours, right? Yeah. Now, when you say criticize China, we're basically going to address the talking points that people like to discuss, which is, the Uyghurs and, human rights and all that. And, the Chinese, they have these concerns, but it's not part of their daily agenda, right? You need to remember one thing that comes from Chinese history, which is called the Mandate of Heaven, which means the following. Every emperor would only stay in power as long as they were able to deliver public welfare, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they would only be able to retain this mandate of heaven, or they would only be able to remain in power as long as they were able to do it, right? So if you think about all the things the Chinese have looked into, all the things they have gone through over the history of 5,000 years, and they look at their current situation now, and they see, we're better off than anyone else that keeps complaining about us. Think about it. They were able to address the issue of COVID-19 quicker than anyone else. They were able to build hospitals quicker than anyone else. They have built, more, bullet trains than anyone ever in the history of humankind. Their GDP per capita has grown, so much. So you're going to find out that there are going to be people that are going to be critical about, something here and there about the system. But don't we all complain about our systems in a way? And you see that sometimes there are areas that they even admit more criticism, like, environmental standards, and you see the population pushing for it. So I do not see, issues that you need to be going on and pointing fingers and all that, because anyone that always points the finger doesn't realize that they have much worse problems sometimes domestically than they do in someone else's country.
Yeah, I understand what you said, but I'll insist in the question. If you, Marcus, want to make a critic about the system, are you comfortable to do it, given that you are a professor there, or not? Can you answer this one? Or you prefer not to answer? This is the question everybody wants me to ask you. Are you comfortable to answer this question, or you prefer to skip it?
Oh, no, I can answer that. But what I have to tell you is this. Are there problems in China? Of course there are problems in China. Are they difficult to be addressed? They are difficult to be addressed. But the country is doing well, and that's something that people have to realize. What we perceive as human rights in the West is not necessarily what people in Asia perceives to be human rights. right? If you think about China, 40 years ago, there was a decree in Beijing telling people that they should not eat, they should not eat trees because they had a huge famine and hunger and all that. So there is a decree saying that, right? So what I'm saying is this: are there problems in China that could be criticized and all that? Yes, but there is so much more going on that is beneficial for China. And I think we should, instead of being, they have this problem here, this problem there, not really going to lead us anywhere. Now, what really is going to make us do better is if we find, okay, the Chinese have problems, so do we. So does the United States of America, so does the UK and all that. So we should move on, turn on the page and see, okay, how can we improve the relationship and do it better? Now, in classes, I am free to talk to my students what the problems are because we discuss current issues in China, right? My students are going to be diplomats. So we make, they read The Economist and all that, and they ask questions. And we say, okay, yeah, we make comparisons between the East and the West and how the Chinese are doing. And in a way, whenever it comes to the end of the class, we say, okay, yeah, in that sense, China can perfect it, China can improve it, but they're still doing better than others are doing in the same areas. And what is the most important thing is to deliver welfare to the population, and they're doing it.
Very interesting, Marcus. I have a last question from Carlos Gerdau. He's saying that the American-Chinese confrontation is escalating. Technology, trade, geopolitics. Will it stay like that, slow down, or get worse? We talked a little bit about that in the past, but
no, it's not going to slow down. This is the new normal, right? And it's the new normal. You have on one side China ascending, and on the other side you have the U.S. descending. Jeff is from the U.S., but the thing I always like to say is that even the social fabric of the United States is not the same one nowadays that is willing to push the United States into remaining like the great generation of the 50s that built America as the way it is. So we do feeling when you go to China that they have this vibe of making the country a relevant player in the international field, and they want to be respected, right? And they want to emphasize that, and they are not willing to waste time in some of the discussions that we have. Like, look into Brazil, the amount of time that we waste discussing things that are kind of useless, right? But we like to, but to move us further. And so this clash, the ascending power and the declining one, to be seen, the and they have been able to build the world system which is very positive, right? We cannot complain about the world in the last 70 years. We have been having peace and all that. But I think that if the U.S. has this issue of not accepting the fact that it's slowly becoming number two, then the clash between the two is going to be the new normal.
Mm-hmm. And I got a question here from Niazi Neto. He's a very digital guy, Jeff. So the question is for you. And you are American, the land of freedom of speech. It's one of the first articles of your constitution. So he's asking if you realize if the Chinese people, do they think there's a repression for freedom of speech and thinking, or they just want to build their businesses and take care of the families?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, because I don't see any data about this that I believe. What people think. People ask us a lot, like Chinese consumers, do they care about privacy or not, relative to, say, Americans? Is it different? And you could say the free speech, free expression would be a similar type question. I see studies on that. I don't know if I really believe the numbers at all, because I think it's hard to know. So Yeah, it's unclear to me. It's a different system for sure, and people have strong feelings about it on both sides. I mean, one thing people forget is a lot of these issues are very political, in that they make people very emotional. You know, so we hear the U.S. side a lot because the U.S. is in the news a lot. As emotional on the Chinese side. Chinese consumers have as strong opinions and are as emotionally invested in a lot of these subjects as well, but often in completely different ways. So if you bring up this subject, actually what you hear about is you hear a lot of strong emotions on all the sides, and they're pretty different actually. So I think it's worth keeping in mind that the whole free speech thing is interesting because one, it immediately kicks you into the question of the Chinese political system, but it's kind of a technology question. I mean, YouTube actively censors people who are putting out medical information if they don't think it's right. I mean, and I have a medical degree. I can tell you the stuff they're approving, a lot of it is total nonsense. And I want to know who's censoring medical information. And show me your medical degree, right? They don't have them. So the whole censorship free speech thing, it kind of plays out in technology in disturbing ways that I don't think anyone has figured out. Like Mark Zuckerberg is a good example. The benefit of Facebook is anyone can say anything at scale. Mass free speech, you know, billions of people all chatting. If people put up a lot of horrific stuff, if everyone starts taking nude photos and put them up, it ruins the experience for everyone. So you have to curate the content to make the platform a good service. But curating content at that large of scale is technologically impossible. You can't do it. You know, people upload millions of hours of YouTube video every hour. You can't watch all those and check them. So if you don't curate, you get yelled at because you see a lot of horrific stuff. If you curate too much, people call it censorship. So like Mark Zuckerberg, he gets yelled at every day on both sides. It's a tech problem. That's the problem. Technology is just changing a lot of the way you think about speech. And the answers are all bad. Like, there's no good answers yet. So there's a political side of that question, and I think there's a technology side that is bigger than China that everyone is dealing with.
Jeff, any question to Marcus? Jeff, do you have a question to Marcus, to Professor Marcus?
No, I'm okay. I mean, I don't really know about the political side, to tell you the truth.
Okay, so Marcus, last question from Carlos Gerdau again. China will have a stronger currency than US? If so, when?
I wouldn't say a stronger currency because, you know, the Chinese they still, you know, America is still largest market in the world, right? You know, so I think that the Chinese, by having a currency that is competitive, they're still going to make Americans buy things again, and they don't want to get on a par value companies to actually move back in reality to the United States. But what we see is that what China wants to see replaced is, you know, the system for, you know, changing money, not changing money, but for sending money from one place to the other. The Chinese want, because the Americans control through that, right? They control any transaction that you have, and sometimes, you know, they do not want. No, the oil market is a U.S. dollar-based market, and the Chinese want to change that because they know this. One of the things that the United States greatly benefits is the fact that they have the dollar, right? And there are only two ways for you to get dollars. You, as a country like Brazil, You either export more, right? And you get dollars, or you get investment in US dollars. Now, for you to export more, you need to lower the pricing of your product so you are competitive. So, you can see that in the, things are cheaper in the US because people have devalued currencies and they're selling to the United States at a cheaper pricing because they need the dollars to finance their transactions, right, in the international system. Now, China, people sell more to China because China has a huge market. Now, in the future, think about, if we are not so dependent on the dollar, but we also have the yuan to transact with other countries, and the Chinese are big consumers, like 25,000 euro, $25,000 GDP per capita, then imagine the change that it's going to have. So I'm going to see that, you steadily, and that's the plan of the Chinese, is to have the RMB slowly replace the dollar as the only currency, only reserve currency in the world. Now, there's one point that I wanted to make, and I forgot to say that to you. China last year, in the last 2 years, has had an average of 130 or 150 million people as tourists in the world. So that means Chinese people leaving China, right, going abroad and returning, and they're going to Europe and all that. If the Chinese system were not doing so well, the government would not let so many people go out, and people wouldn't return. So what you see is that you talk to students, and I have the chance of teaching now in Europe, and I have many Chinese students, and you ask them, so what do you want to do after? Do you want to stay in Europe? Do you want to go to the US? And they all say that they want to go to China. So that gives you a feeling that the vibe and that sense that, things are happening in China quicker and faster, is something that they're looking into. So it's it's a very interesting experience to be there and see this, interesting vibe that you see all over, technology, political issues and traveling and all that.
Professor Marcos, Professor Jeffrey, we are getting to the end of our live. I did learn a lot from you today, so thanks so much for sharing your brains with us. Jeff and Marcos, people that are listening to us, if they want to get in contact with further information, how can they reach you? Jeff, I know you have a website, you have LinkedIn page.
Right. For me, the easiest way is jefftowson.com, which is a website. And I do online teaching there. There's a little subscription service if you're interested, where we do a lot of digital Asia strategy and company information. Or just go to LinkedIn. I'm there all the time. Easy to find.
So jefftowson.com. I just learned how to use this program, you see. I can put the link here.
Very nice.
All right. So Marcos, if people want to follow your ideas, what is the best thing to do?
Now you have my, I think my presentation has my WeChat, my WhatsApp, and my email, right? So if anyone wants to have the presentation access to the presentation, it has information there.
I'm adding your presentation.
Or you can email me, right? You see, there it is.
Okay, so if anyone wants to hire services for understanding China further, it's mvfreitas@cfau.edu.cn. And we have on the screen your WeChat and WhatsApp as well.
That is correct.
Right? Amazing. Okay.
Yeah, that is correct.
Jeff, have a good day. I think it's 6:10 a.m. for you there. Marcos, have a good night. It's 8:10 p.m. here in Brazil. And it was very nice talking to you guys.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and very nice to talk to you, Jeff, again. Enjoy your long day today.
Bye-bye.
Bye.